Network Podcast. My name's Tom Willings.
And I'm Tom Woolman.
It's an exciting day for me. We're welcoming a new guest and a man that I've worked with for several years in my early poultry days, Graham Atkinson. How the devil are you, sir?
I'm very well, Tom. Thank you very much. Good to see you. Yeah, very well.
What's the weather like in Yorkshire at the moment, Graham?
It is at standard Yorkshire weather, around a tropical 30 degrees or so, which obviously we benefit from 365 days of the year.
You're looking well on it. Cracking tan.
Cameras can do some wonderful things.
That's a window directly behind you, I see.
It is. Yeah, absolutely.
Costa del Yorkshire.
View out onto the coast. Yeah.
Fantastic. Well, Graham, we're thrilled to have you here. Welcome.
Thank you.
Thank you for joining us. You've set up your own consultancy. You've joined the dark side. You're out in the wild. How's it going?
Indeed, yeah. Took the big leap. Crikey, time flies. May of last year, we started Grange Consultancy, and thankfully, desperately looking forward. Touch wood, it's going on quite nicely. Yeah, it's been as you guys know, when you step out of the world of employment and into your own world, there's a period of nervousness, shall we say, that you're just going to be able to keep yourself busy and pay the bills, but that seems to be going well. It's a varied diet, which I enjoy. So all things from kind of data and tech through to health and welfare, pharmaceutical, a little bit of writing here and there, and then latterly probably wasn't where we set off with, which some people may say is a crazy thought, having spent almost 30 years working with producers or being one. And 14 years at Noble Foods, certainly definitely working with producers. We didn't really set off with that as an aim, but as time's gone on and in the last few months, the producer magnet has pulled strongly. So started to venture back into the world of producers, which is enjoyable.
Fantastic.
And that's sort of the subject that we were particularly interested in talking about today, because been reading the Ranger, which is Befreppa's monthly magazine that comes out, and there's an excellent article in there this month about egg supply contract and what makes a good contract, really aimed at the producer, but also the packer as well, as to what makes for a good contract for both sides, giving fairness and openness. I don't know potentially whether you could give us some thoughts, Graham, in terms of what you think makes a good contract and what producers should be looking out for.
Yeah, certainly. Interestingly, that's been some of the conversations and some of the work with producers, and I guess perhaps because they're feeling a sense of, look, we all know that egg producers are in a good place in terms of margin, in a place of margin they have never been before. Realistically, let's be truthful about it. But I think among those producers, they do realise that this will not last forever, and they're looking out there. Perhaps they're looking because they're looking over the fence and thinking, is there some more to be had in the current climate, or concerned around the longevity of their current margin. So what have I learned through those exercises is that producers don't necessarily understand the devil of the detail of the contract. So there are numerous points in there, and I've read the article as well. So let's just pick
it's
one
funny
out.
Because I think if I take it back to my poultry meat experience, I've known producers and working with contract breeder producers. There's people that actually for years and years really prided themselves on not having a contract. They prided themselves on the fact that they were doing business with people that they trusted, and that they'd worked with for years and years and years. And and there have been times, I think in my past, when we've been trying to introduce contracts to producers, and they've taken it as a bit of an insult. What does this mean about our relationship? It's like trying to introduce a prenup on a marriage. What's going to happen?
Exactly. You've got. I remember very well. You've got a school that have never signed the document because, as you say, they're their bond is their word, and their word is stronger than oak. Yeah, and then you've got a load of guys who are scared witless to sign it because they don't actually know what it says, and they're more concerned about their obligations to their customer than they are their customer's obligations to them. And yeah, you think, gosh, goodness me. And then where do you go from there? I think, why are we talking about this now? It's pertinent now because it feels you haven't got to have an especially gifted crystal ball to feel that, the supply and demand balance are starting to shift. And if those margins that you've mentioned already, Graham, are as good as they're going to get, then kind of the next step is down. And the huge bit about any contentiousness within a contract is price adjustment and price movement.
Yeah.
And this article is a great explanation of all of the different mechanisms that can be used to make that adjustment. But just from your point of view, you see an awful lot of contracts out there. What's normal? What should people be looking for in their egg supply agreements?
Well, I think you've a point to make here as well. When we kind of use the word contract, it sounds as though that's an all-encompassing document that covers absolutely everything that both producer and packer need to take from that relationship. And let's be clear, this is a relationship, it's a partnership. There needs to be something in this arrangement for everyone. It isn't and shouldn't be a one-sided affair. But I think what I'm seeing is you're actually talking about two separate pieces of work when you're talking contract. So there'll be an egg supply agreement, which will cover things such as force majeure, which we may come on to, or quality standards and access to farm and all of the other bits and pieces that come within that. But actually pricing and contract term, if you like, the length of that arrangement are held within a separate document or an email, perhaps, or maybe not even that. So they're two very different things in some ways. So point number one, how does one connect to the other if you are a recipient of those two separate documents, or indeed if it's all sat within the one document? I think that's a step forward. But then you come down to the devil of the detail of what's in there. So again, I think for you guys, you'll have seen enough of these contracts over the years as well to understand or to understand that force majeure as one will be in there. So okay, that's great. The contracts I've seen, it's maybe a paragraph, a scant paragraph. What's actually included in that?
And the other thing I was thinking of is what's different in the egg sector to the meat sector is in the egg sector, you've got this, certainly this work which you can credit Befrepa with, that have worked with ADAS to produce a sort of cost of production model, which is not something that we have in the meat sector. Certainly when people are producing contracts and producing pricing, it will be based on cost of production, but there's not necessarily a sort of an agreed industry-wide cost of production, and that's been something that is actually quite useful now, isn't it, for egg producers that are looking at contracts about. There's a lot of contracts which reference the ADAS cost of production model.
Absolutely, Tom, and I think that's come on such a long way from where it was when it was first introduced. There were some points within that and some numbers within that, if you like, that were contentious, but a cross section of industry came together, along clearly driven by Befrepa and with ADAS to develop that, in more detail. Now, that's always there for improvement. It's always there for forensic interrogation, and if things need to be adapted and so on, well, that's absolutely fine, isn't it? That's how things should be done. But I think that it is a huge step forward for the industry. We are seeing more contracts that include the ADAS cost of production model tracking, and it's my own personal view, I think that's a great thing. It's a very clear set of numbers, provided your rules and your metrics around that are clear within the agreement, then I think that's beneficial for both parties in terms of being very clear as to how your price is made up.
Would you say, Graham, that's you make a really interesting point about the adoption of that cost of production reference, and the independent nature of it is why it's so valuable. Would you say it is becoming the norm, or used in the majority of cases, or just from a low base starting to become more frequently used? You'll see a lot more farm contracts than I will in my world, but.
I think it's probably the latter, Tom, in that it's come from a low base, and it's growing well, and it's growing at pace. So again, from my perspective, I think that's a good thing. However, we are still in a world where we see producers, and look, I'm not saying that there's anything wrong with it. Individual producers will make their own business decisions based on their feelings of it. And if you are on and I'll use that market price currently, then arguably your price is strong. But if that is your only arrangement, to refer back to your earlier point, and I'm in that camp as well, the winds of change feel as though they're starting to blow, and from where we are, prices probably only going down. Well, if all you're on is a market price, then for that producer, as we well know, if that market's going down, there's very rarely going to be somebody who's standing out above that market paying top dollar you can port your business across to. So that for me is a huge worry. I think that's exposure in the extreme, personally.
Yeah. Even from a low base, it's great news that more farms are signing up to agreements that have got that independent reference point. I think if I were in that business, what I'd really want to understand is the next link in the chain. And there are reports that there are some retailers or food businesses buying eggs from packers or products from packers that themselves use that cost of production reference as their own method of adjudicating change, and that is a sustainable chain. If
it is,
all of the parties in it line up and sign up to the same measurement of value, that is good for everybody.
Well, I suppose one thought that I've got, and maybe this is just me playing devil's advocate, but if we say that cost of production contracts are good, and say whatever 95% of the industry adopt them, that's great. But potentially, is it also a little bit of almost a danger? It becomes a license to print money, and is that just a recipe? If everyone gets on that bandwagon for oversupply, don't you need a little bit of market tightening? I don't know. It's difficult to see how producers can be entirely protected, but also, I guess, still benefit from good prices, which come from having a market that requires growth and requires more supply.
Absolutely, and I guess what I'm about to say, I can potentially hear the national producer base, or a good percentage of it now, screaming for blood. But it's back to that earlier point. Margins are in a place margins have not been. So from there, we are going to head down. There is no doubt about that. I don't think I'm Jedi Knight enough around the egg market to predict what forces it may be that actually push the price down. Now, if you're on that cost of production, nay, margin tracker, then you follow that movement. That's fine. So here's the contentious bit: is the margin too high for sustainable long-term contracts? I arguably would say yes, it is. Producers will very clearly and quite rightly say, well, hang on a minute, it's not that many years ago, and Tom will remember this when we were working together, where egg price per dozen didn't start with a pound sign. We were in the 90-95 pence kind of bracket. We're way beyond that now. So just desserts that margins have got into the place that they are. But if you want to take that longer term, and back to the point around retailers starting to perhaps use that model as well, that's transparency through the supply chain. That should be a good thing. But somehow parties need to come together to agree this is the kind of margin that we can hold throughout this supply chain, regardless of the movements around it. And that, I think, is the, if you'll excuse the pun, the golden egg that should be searched for.
not every farm is the same. Not every farmer, and I think Tom, you've already made this point to a degree. But different producers with different ambitions for their product, who want to work with different sorts of businesses. They're going to be under different terms and conditions of the sale of their product. If to your exact point, Tom, if everybody had a cost of production plus model at the sort of margins that Graham is alluding to, yeah, our industry would be in all sorts of difficulty very, very quickly, particularly if planning were a great deal easier to go and get as well, because the rate of return is enormous. But it shouldn't be available to everybody. There should be a great deal of selection around who's on these sorts of contracts, and it will be based on the age of that farm and the type of production, the alignment to the customer right the way through the chain, etc., and the commitment to that farm under those contractual terms should be based on that kind of long-term need of packer, retailer, and farmer all being aligned. It can't just be, oh well, I produce eggs and therefore I've got to have exactly that same contract, because it'll be oversupplied in 5 seconds flat.
And I think there's space enough in the market, both in the egg sector and in the meat sector, for as you say, there are different businesses. There are different businesses models. Some people have got a lot of borrowing. Other people have got no borrowing. Some people will be buying their feed. Some people will be making their feed and trying to play the market a little bit that way. And I think there's probably enough flex in the market for different people to have different contracts. And actually the sort of the wholesale market, the spot market, doesn't need to be that big really to have an impact. I'm sure there will always be enough producers that will want to play the field and see how they get on.
I wanted to ask Graham about force majeure. We touched on it a moment ago, but one thing that goes around in my head is around bird flu, because force majeure, and again this article touches on it quite nicely, but there's a whole litany of uncontrollables and unforeseen circumstances that are shown as an example of what force majeure actually is. But the first one would be disease, and it is or is not avian flu a force majeure issue, because surely it's foreseeable. It's in sometimes, depending on the books of the insurers, it's an insurable risk in its own right. So ought it be included in force majeure or not? What's your view?
It's a great question. Is there a right or wrong answer? I don't know. My view is it should be included. I that's where I would stand on it. I do take your point. I mean, I think depending on the level of threat, if you like, the availability of insurance changes season to season, if we have such a thing in that world now. But nonetheless, for me, that should be included, and that's just one singular point within a clause within an awful lot of contracts that to go all Yorkshire on you tells you nout, because it just kind of briefly describes that, well, do you know what, there could be some things that are out of everybody's control, and this clause is to cover that. What does that mean? So what are the things? And I think that article touches on what are the things. Let's have those listed off clearly, and what are the ramifications should, unfortunately, any one of those things occur within our agreement. So I think there's more work to be done in general on that side of it. It's a big subject, and it's a very important piece within the contract. And for me, AI included, yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. What's our, if we look to wrap up, guys, what's our advice to any farmers listening, or for that matter, anyone in the chain listening? What's the kind of take home, the call to arms or action?
Oh, well, I'll give you number one would be, even if you think you know what it says, go get your contract, sit down and read it, and highlight the questions you have within it, and seek advice. Seek advice on the bits that you're not clear on. Would be number one for me.
I think there's a tendency at the moment, while prices are good, that everyone focuses on price, and price is the most important thing that people look at with contracts. But actually, it's clear that there's all sorts of other things. With how's that price going to be structured going forward? What other mechanisms have you for adjusting that price either up or down. But as you say, coming to the force majeure point, if you haven't got proper protections there, you could wipe out any gains that you're making through good pricing in an instant with the wrong contract.
I think for me, you've touched on there the most important thing, which is understanding the process, the justification for adjustment of price. When it moves, why does it move, and in what circumstances, and to what extent, and knowing that process. And I think there's a in the background, of course, you've got this DEFRA, Fairness in the Supply Chain review, that sort of listed out the blueprint for what good looks like as a code of practice for contractual arrangements between buyers and sellers of farm products. And I'm sure within that there was some incredibly onerous obligation on the buyer, on the, let's say, the packer in this instance, to be completely transparent with why prices were changing, which I think from a packer's point of view is actually really, really difficult to do, because you buy a basket of goods from a whole concoction of different people, but that's also true on the selling side of things. You've got all sorts of different customers with all sorts of different arrangements for all sorts of different specifications and standards of product. And although a lot of farmers will, get on the old keyboard warrior group chat and say, wholesale market this, or my egg price that, or retailers are actually retailing to the consumer at this sort of price level and I should not be paid this. They have very, very little generally understanding of how an egg packer balances the books, because it's a very, very, very complicated thing that even if I think I wanted to understand as a independent kind of auditor looking to arbitrate over that price movement, I'd find it very difficult. That's a big old ask, but that kind of degree of transparency is what government are calling for, and that's what they're asking. And I think the least that we should be saying to people is make sure you understand the status quo in your contract, because as sure as eggs is eggs, changes are coming at some point, and you need to understand what's right, what's not, and what to do about it if you're not happy about it.
Well, absolutely. And when you reference that kind of change, which could be huge in terms of how these contracts and agreements look, I personally don't like surprises. So don't tee yourself up for even bigger surprises as that kind of thing flushes through. Understand what you've got already and try and get that in a place that it should be, and you're comfortable. To your point, Tom, earlier, each individual business, different needs and wants and ways of looking at it. Get that, put it on, work hard to try and work with your packer partner to get that in a place that you're both comfortable. Because, to your point, Tom, change is coming without a doubt.
I guess we should say to people, if they want to get in touch with you, Graham, and Grange Consultancy, then you're available for this sort of work.
Yeah, absolutely. Yes. I'm never going to turn that opportunity down. Thank you very much, sir, for that bit of advertising. Lovely.
Yeah, perfect.
Brilliant. All right. Well, thank you ever so much for joining us today, Graham. And best of luck with your consulting going forward.
Thank you very much for having me on.